August 19, 1944, the day the German General Staff misread history. In the fortified map room of East Prussia's heavily guarded headquarters, General Oberst Alfred Jodl traced his finger along a red line stretching inland from the Normandy coast. Patton's Third Army had advanced farther in 30 days than any German commander believed physically possible. But now, Jodl thought the laws of logistics were finally catching up with the Americans. For decades, German doctrine had preached the same lesson: no army outruns its fuel. Not Rommel, not Guderian, not even Patton. Jodl's staff had run the calculations repeatedly. Patton's armored divisions required 150,000 gallons of fuel every single day. Infantry divisions needed 700 tons of supplies daily. Armored divisions demanded even more, 1,000 tons per day. And now the Americans were nearly 400 miles from their supply depots in Normandy. It seemed impossible. He must stop, Jodl concluded, within hours, days at most. Every senior German officer agreed. The Americans had advanced too quickly, too far, too recklessly. Their speed, once their advantage, had now transformed into a death trap. What Jodl did not know, what no German officer anywhere suspected, was that at that exact moment, 125 miles away, a force was awakening that would rewrite the meaning of modern warfare. An impossible force. A force born not of military genius, but of industrial magnitude. A force powered by 23,000 truck drivers, 75% of them African American, operating a system that made German doctrine irrelevant. The first engines were already rumbling to life. Headlights flickered on, despite blackout rules. Convoys assembled, ignoring every principle of spacing and camouflage. The Red Ball Express had begun, and within 72 hours, it would reshape the war. A supply line Germany believed could not exist. Jodl's mistake, shared by the entire German General Staff, was simple. He assumed the Americans followed European logistics logic. He assumed wrong. German doctrine viewed logistics as a fragile chain, vulnerable to destruction, dependent on railroads, limited by fuel, restricted by distance. In Russia, the Wehrmacht had watched entire offensives grind to a halt because wagons broke down, horses died, and fuel never arrived. The Soviets didn't stop them. Supply did. So when Americans advanced 400 miles in a month, German officers nodded knowingly. "We have seen this before," they said. "They will freeze in place." General der Panzertrupp Heinrich von Luttwitz declared, "Their machines will now betray them. Machines require fuel. Fuel they cannot possibly deliver." Every calculation was precise. Every assumption supported by decades of German experience. All of it was wrong. The American answer, a one-way highway of fire and steel. On August 25, 1944, in a requisitioned French chateau near Le Mans, Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayres of the Motor Transport Service faced a room of exhausted logistics officers. Traditional supply routes had collapsed. Railroads were destroyed. Depots overwhelmed. Patton was screaming for fuel. The math was absurd. Patton needed 12,000 tons of supplies per day, move across hundreds of miles of shattered roads. It shouldn't have been possible. Ayres exhaled, then delivered the plan that stunned everyone present. "We're creating a one-way highway from Cherbourg to the front. 20-hour driving shifts. Headlights on. No stopping. No spacing. No exceptions. We move 12,500 tons a day minimum." Silence. Someone whispered, "That violates every rule." Ayres smiled. "Good, because the rules are slowing us down." He named the system after an American railroad term for priority freight, the Red Ball Express. Within 36 hours, he would command the most audacious logistics experiment in military history. What the Red Ball really was: industrial madness turned into warfare. The specifications alone would have horrified any German planner. 2 parallel one-way highways, one for loaded trucks moving forward, one for empty trucks rushing back. 5,958 trucks active minimum, 140 truck companies, 24-hour operations, convoys spaced every 5 minutes, headlights blazing, inviting air attack, 35 miles per hour average speed. Mobile repairs every 50 miles. MP checkpoints removing slow vehicles. Zero camouflage. Zero pauses except for fuel. It wasn't logistics. It was industrialized motion. A continuous, roaring river steel. And the fuel? Germany assumed the Americans couldn't possibly provide enough gasoline. But the U.S. had already solved that too, with something Germany never imagined possible. Pipelines under the English Channel. Operation Pluto. Fuel flowed like water. Convoys drank millions of gallons daily, without slowing. The most unexpected detail: who actually drove the trucks. Of the 23,000 men who would soon operate the Red Ball Express, 3 out of 4 were African American. Soldiers still segregated, still denied equal rights in the Army and in America itself. Men forbidden from eating in white establishments. Men barred from combat roles. Men whom Nazi racial theorists dismissed as inferior. Yet these were the men who would keep Patton supplied. These were the men who would perform the impossible. These were the men who would refute Hitler's ideology, not with rifles, but with horsepower. They painted slogans on the trucks. Hitler, here we come. Detroit to Berlin Express. Patton's blood bank. They built their own rules. Slow trucks must pull over. Never stop unless on fire. Push broken trucks into ditches. 20 miles per hour is a crime. 35 miles per hour is the law. Within 48 hours, the German army began hearing reports that made no sense. Continuous vehicle column. Headlights visible for 20 kilometers. Estimate 1,000 vehicles per hour. German officers stared at the reports in disbelief. This wasn't warfare. This was industrial thunder. A storm rolling east. The first German reaction: fear and confusion. General Lieutenant Edgar Feutinger of the 21st Panzer Division secretly observed the Red Ball route from a ridge on August 30th. His report to headquarters was chilling. The enemy operates a supply system beyond our comprehension. They break every rule and succeed because they rely not on discipline, but on mass production. German officers realized something devastating. The Americans didn't care about losses. A broken truck? Replace it. A destroyed vehicle? Replace it. A dead engine? Swap it in 45 minutes. It was warfare Germany had never prepared for. It was warfare driven by factories, not doctrine. It was warfare Germany could not stop. September 1944, the highway that should not exist. By the first week of September, something unprecedented was happening on the narrow French roads running from Cherbourg toward the front. A continuous mechanical roar that never stopped. Not for rain, not for bombs, not for nightfall. The Red Ball Express had become a living organism, a metallic bloodstream feeding an army that refused to slow down. Every 50 yards, another truck. Every minute, another convoy. Every hour, thousands of engines screaming eastward. At any given time, 1,500 trucks were moving fully loaded. 1,500 were rushing back empty. 900 were being repaired. 500 were being refueled. 200 were completely replaced. And the rest were waiting for assignment. Germany had never seen anything like this. No one in Europe had. Because the Red Ball wasn't just a supply line. It was industrial power converted into motion. Organized chaos. The American way. German doctrine saw logistics as a chain. American logistics was a network, redundant, flexible, chaotic, but unstoppable. Here's what organized chaos looked like. Trucks often left before paperwork was complete. Drivers memorized the roads instead of using maps. Repairs were done good enough instead of perfect. MPs waived rules when speed mattered. Dead trucks became spare parts depots on the roadside. Convoys were so long they stretched from horizon to horizon. A French villager watching the column said, "It was like watching a river of machines, as if all of America was driving past U.S. Even accidents fed the machine. A wrecked truck? Push it aside. Another would refill the gap within minutes. It was a system built on one belief. Perfection slows you down. Quantity doesn't. How much fuel the Red Ball itself consumed. The irony was staggering. The Red Ball Express burned astonishing quantities of fuel just to keep the trucks running. Back-end index pointing right, 300,000 gallons of gasoline every single day, just to supply Patton with the gasoline he needed. German officers who obtained this figure refused to believe it. One report was sent back with a note. Impossible. Enemy must have used a decimal error. They hadn't. America was now burning more gasoline just on its supply trucks than Germany could deliver to its entire Western Front. A science Germany never mastered. Redundancy. German logistics value precision. American logistics value redundancy. If one vehicle broke down, irrelevant. If an entire convoy was hit, replace it. If roads collapsed, build new ones overnight. If bridges were destroyed, throw down Bailey bridges faster than Germans could bomb them. Germany thought in limits. America thought in multiples. When German spies reported, enemies sent 400 trucks. They didn't realize the U.S. had sent another 400 behind them and another 400 behind those, and had another 1,000 waiting. It wasn't fair. It wasn't symmetrical. It wasn't even the same kind of warfare. This was industrial supremacy functioning in real time. The psychological effect of endless engines. German troops near the Red Ball route couldn't see the convoys at night, but they heard them, a low, constant rumble in the distance, a never-ending bass note of engines. It haunted them. It kept them awake. It made them question everything. A Wehrmacht sergeant later recalled, "It sounded like thunder that never stopped, like a storm rolling toward Germany that we could not escape." Another said, "We counted trucks until we lost count. Then we realized counting meant nothing. There were always more." This was psychological warfare far more devastating than propaganda. It told the Germans, "You cannot stop us. Even if you destroy 100 trucks, we have 1,000 more." And for the first time since 1939, German soldiers began to fear American power, not just on the battlefield, but behind it. Patton's impossible advance. The Americans advanced so quickly that German high command assumed their reports were mistaken. Backhand index pointing right Patton was advancing 40 to 60 miles per day, outrunning every German retreat. That pace was unprecedented in modern warfare. No European army had ever achieved it. And it wasn't Patton's tanks that made it possible. It wasn't his artillery. It wasn't his generals. It was the trucks. It was the drivers. It was a Red Ball Express. The fuel, food, ammo, parts, oil, and blood required for Patton's Third Army flowed through one beating artery. Without it, France would have swallowed the American advance. With it, the Americans crossed France as if the country were downhill. German commanders realized something terrible. General Walter Model, reviewing captured supply data, grew pale. He finally understood. The Americans were no longer fighting with military logistics. They were fighting with civilian infrastructure multiplied by wartime urgency. Model told his staff, "We are not fighting soldiers. We are fighting an industry, a nation-sized factory." That realization, spoken aloud in a bunker in Belgium, marked the moment German high command understood they could no longer win war, not strategically, not economically, not logistically. And the Red Ball Express was a proof. The secret of the Red Ball drivers, madness and bravery. Most Red Ball drivers were barely trained. Some had never driven a vehicle before joining the Army. Many were teenagers. Most were African-American soldiers denied combat roles. But on the Red Ball route, they became legends. Drivers told each other, "Sleep when the war is over. Stay awake or die. If your headlights go out, follow the truck noise. If your brakes fail, aim for the ditch, not the convoy. If a German shoots at you, don't stop, drive faster." One driver said, "We didn't fear the Germans. We feared fatigue, because fatigue would kill you faster than bullets." Many drove 20 to 30 hours without rest, eating chocolate bars behind the wheel, gulping cold coffee, trying to stay awake. It wasn't glory. It wasn't heroic speeches. It was raw survival mixed with brute determination. Mechanics who repaired an army while it moved. Behind the convoys came the unseen heroes. Mobile maintenance teams. Using jeeps, record trucks, and improvised roadside workshops, they replaced engines in 45 minutes. changed transmissions on dirt roads, welded frames by lantern light, cannibalized wrecks for parts, rebuilt trucks on the spot, patched blown tires with strips of rubber. One mechanic wrote, "If it had wheels, we made it move. If it didn't, we pushed it until it did." German intelligence noted enemy vehicles repaired at impossible speed. Yes, because the Americans had replacement parts, and Germany didn't. The Red Ball route becomes a highway of fire. German aircraft rarely attacked the convoys. Why? Because Allied fighters dominated the sky. And even when Germans tried, the Red Ball's density made targeting meaningless. Hit one truck, and 1,000 more roared past. The Luftwaffe was irrelevant here. This was a war of engines. It was a war Germany had already lost. The Red Ball presses beyond its limits. September 1944. By late September, Patton's Third Army was pushing through eastern France with unbelievable momentum. But the impossible speed came at a terrible cost. The Red Ball Express was being pushed far beyond anything its designers imagined. Every mile forward meant an extra mile of supply line. Every extra mile meant more gasoline burned just to deliver gasoline. Every gallon moved cost a gallon in transport. This was the cruel paradox of logistics. To supply the front, you must consume the supply. And the Red Ball was consuming everything. Fuel, trucks, tires, men, running on fumes, literally. By September 10th, Patton was burning more gasoline per day than the entire British Army. Yet his fuel depots were empty. Drivers arrived at forward supply points only to find fuel drums already issued, ammo already distributed, entire depots drained, and officers screaming orders for more, now. A logistics officer reported, "We were pumping gasoline from trucks that arrived only minutes earlier, then sending them back empty. They didn't even shut the engines off." In some stretches, gas pumps were so overwhelmed that they simply left the nozzle open, filling jerrycans one after another in a constant torrent. The men who move an army while half asleep. Officially, Red Ball drivers were supposed to drive 12-hour shifts. In reality, they often drove 20 to 30 hours straight, kept awake by Benzedrine pills, bad coffee, cold rain blowing through open windows, the fear of rear-ending another truck, or the terror of falling asleep and crashing off the road. Drivers tied shoelaces to their eyelids. Others bit their tongues until they bled. Some sang at the top of their lungs to stay awake. But for many, nothing worked. Crashes became routine. Fatalities were constant. Truck after truck left the road, plunged into ditches, overturned in fields, or collided with other convoys. A Red Ball veteran said, "The Germans didn't kill us. Fatigue did." The roads of France become death traps. The French road system, bombed, cratered, clogged with refugees, scarred by retreat, was never meant for thousands of 2.5-ton trucks moving nonstop. Rain turned dirt shoulders into sinking mud pits. Bridges buckled under weight they were never designed for. Switchbacks created bottlenecks so long they could be seen from aircraft. At certain points, both directions jammed solid. Trucks overheating, radiators bursting, engines dying, traffic locked in place for hours. Men sat smoking in the cabs, staring at the road ahead, trapped in a steel river they could not escape. The trucks broke down so often that maintenance crews developed a dark joke. If it moves, we fix it later. If it stops moving, we fix it now. The impossible burden on the mechanics. The mechanics, mostly African-American soldiers as well, worked miracles on the roadside, removing engines in mud, welding frames by moonlight, changing transmissions in the rain, patching tires with strips of rubber, cannibalizing wrecks better than any battlefield scavenger. They built mobile workshops out of jeeps, tool racks welded to the side, generators strapped to back, spare parts hanging like trophies. One mechanic recalled, "We didn't repair trucks, we resurrected them." And when a truck died completely, it became a donor. The roadsides of France turned into open-air automotive graveyards. Twisted husks, missing wheels, engines, doors, axles, even seats. They were stripped bare in minutes. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was left behind. The red ball reaches full capacity, and still it is not enough. At its peak, the red ball express move and astonishing. Backhand index pointing right, 12,500 tons of supplies per day. That was the original target. The Americans hit it, surpassed it, and then kept going. But the war kept demanding more. Fuel depots and forward areas needed 100,000 gallons per hour. Artillery required tons of ammunition per minute. Armored divisions wanted spare engines, gearboxes, track links. The red ball drivers pushed harder. Mechanics worked without sleep. MPs cleared blocked roads with ruthless efficiency. But there were limits even America could not smash through. And those limits arrived in the form of the line that stopped an army, the Siegfried Wall. By early autumn, Patton's furious advance slammed into dense German defenses, pillboxes, anti-tank barriers, minefields, bunkers, trench lines. To break them, he needed more fuel, more explosives, more artillery shells, more bridging equipment, more everything. But the red ball, for the first time, began to choke under the weight. Some days, only 8,000 tons arrived, others 6,000. Once, only 4,000. At the same time, the distance from Cherbourg had grown so enormous that trucks burned almost as much gasoline as they delivered. Logistics hit the wall before the infantry did. Patton famously ranted, "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks need gas." But anger couldn't change physics. The trucks were at their breaking point. The drivers were hallucinating from exhaustion. The mechanics were sleeping beside engines. The roads were collapsing. Something had to change. The American solution: build another red ball. And so they did. In late September, the U.S. created a parallel supply route. Backhand index pointing right, the White Ball Express, a northern corridor supporting the First Army. Now 2 supply rivers flowed across liberated France. Red ball for Patton, white ball for Hodges. Once again, German intelligence reports came in. 2 supply highways, equal density, equal madness. General Lober's jaw was briefed again. He studied the maps. He read the reports. He looked at the supply tonnage. He did the calculations. And finally, he whispered the truth. We cannot stop the Americans. Their supply lines are stronger than our armies. This was it. The German High Command now understood that logistics, not tanks, not generals, not fortifications, would decide the war. And the Americans had mastered logistics on a scale the world had never seen. But the Red Ball Express was about to face its greatest test yet. October 1944. The Red Ball begins to collapse but refuses to die. By October, the Red Ball Express was in agony. Trucks were disintegrating. Drivers were hallucinating. Roads were collapsing into mud and rubble. Mechanics slept beneath the very engines they repaired. And still, the convoys moved. Day and night, rain or sun, shellfire or silence. They kept going because they had no choice. If they stopped, the front line stopped. Patton's divisions were stuck at the doorstep of Germany. Hodges' First Army was choking for supplies. Bradley needed ammunition for his next offensive. The British were begging for fuel. Once again, the impossible burden fell on the trucks. The nightmare conditions of the fall of '44. As autumn turned to winter, the Red Ball became something between purgatory and madness. Drivers reported frozen steering wheels, ice forming inside their cabs, brakes locking in the cold, engines failing at night, headlights barely visible through fog, frostbite forming on hands still gripping the wheel. One remembered, "I'd wake up with my head hitting the windshield. I didn't remember falling asleep. Nobody did." Winter roads were so slick that trucks slid sideways off cliffs, vanished into ravines, or jackknifed it and blocked entire highways. And still they drove, because the alternative was unthinkable. American armies starving at the gates of Germany. The terrifying statistics the Army never publicized. The U.S. Army rarely spoke of it publicly, but the Red Ball Express suffered. Thousands of accidents, dozens of fatalities, hundreds of trucks destroyed, countless injuries, and a staggering level of psychological exhaustion. Trucks sometimes collided, and exploded into fireballs that lit the fields. Others rammed into each other in fog, so thick drivers could barely see their own hands. Many did not die from bullets or shells. They died from fatigue. Yet the men never stopped coming. Replacement drivers arrived weekly. Mechanics trained new recruits overnight. Convoys reorganized themselves on the fly. It was not heroism. It was necessity forged into determination. The Red Ball saves Market Garden. In September 1944, Operation Market Garden, Montgomery's bold attempt to leap across the Rhine required an immediate massive boost of supplies. Airborne troops were trapped near Arnhem. British tanks were stalled. Ammunition was dwindling. Only one force could save them, the Red Ball Express. Hundreds of trucks diverted north, delivering artillery shells, medical supplies, food, fuel, reinforcements. Even though Market Garden ultimately failed to take the Rhine Bridge, thousands of Allied soldiers survived because the Red Ball arrived in time. Without it, the casualties would have been catastrophic. German logistics collapsed completely. By mid-autumn, the German army had no functioning supply system left. Their trucks were destroyed, their railways bombed, their horses dying, their fuel gone. German soldiers were eating grass, bark, and sugar beets. Artillery units rationed shells to 3 rounds per day. Tanks were abandoned for lack of fuel. Infantry marched barefoot. German officers who once mocked American inefficiency now stared in horror at the Red Ball supply reports. One colonel wrote, "The enemy's vehicle columns behave like rivers of steel. We cannot interrupt them. We cannot slow them. Their flow is constant and merciless." Another intelligence officer concluded, "Even if we destroy 10 trucks, 100 more appear. We fight a hydra." December 1944, the Red Ball meets its final battle. Then came the Ardennes Offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last gamble. The German surprise attack smashed into the American lines, creating chaos, panic, and disorganization. Roads clogged with retreating vehicles. Fuel depots were captured, bridges blown. Snowstorms choked entire regions. The Red Ball route was severed, but the drivers did not stop. They rerouted through smaller roads, forest paths, civilian lanes, even frozen fields. Trucks slipped off icy cliffs. Convoys disappeared into whiteout storms. MPs waved drivers through intersections with frozen faces and rifles over their shoulders. They delivered the fuel that kept the Sherman tanks moving. They delivered the ammunition that stopped camp grub paper. They delivered the artillery rounds that shattered the German assault. Without the Red Ball, the Ardennes would have collapsed. With it, the Allied line held. The end of the Red Ball, November 16, 1944 to March 1945. Officially, the Red Ball Express was shut down on November 16, 1944. Unofficially, its spirit lived on. The White Ball Express continued operations. Additional ad hoc convoys filled the gap. American engineers rebuilt railroads. Fuel pipelines reached the front. By the time Germany collapsed in March 1945, the Red Ball was no longer needed, but its legacy was overwhelming. 412,000 tons of supplies delivered, 23,000 drivers, 5,958 trucks operating continuously, an army kept alive by wheels, diesel, and determination. Germany had never imagined such logistics. The world had never seen it, and no war would ever be fought the same way again. The men who broke Hitler's logic. Most Red Ball drivers returned home without medals, without recognition, without applause. Many were African-American soldiers who returned to a segregated America that had not changed, even though they had changed the world. One driver said, "We didn't get statues, we didn't get speeches, but our trucks won the war." Another added, "We carried the fuel that burned down Hitler's dreams." History often celebrates generals, tank commanders, fighter aces. But wars are won by the invisible hands. The men driving trucks at 3 a.m. on roads that shouldn't exist. Men sleeping beside engines in the cold. Men pushing machines to their limits through rain, snow, mud, and fear. The Red Ball Express was not glamorous. It was not clean. It was not safe. It was the American war machine at its purest. Messy, loud, improvised, relentless. And it broke the back of the German military more effectively than any tank charge or bombing raid. Epilogue: the highway that built a victory. After the war, the Red Ball Express faded into the shadows of history. Photographs were lost, records scattered, testimonies forgotten. But its legacy lived on in every American logistical miracle that followed. The Berlin airlift, the supply chains of Korea, the convoys of Vietnam. Modern warfare's obsession with mobility. General Eisenhower later said, "Victory in Europe was a logistic victory. The Red Ball Express made that victory possible." He was right. Armies march on their stomachs. Soldiers fight with their courage. But wars are won by supply. And in 1944, the greatest supply operation ever attempted rolled across France in a thunder of engines and grit. The Red Ball Express, the highway that destroyed Hitler, the road that carried victory.